10, 9. Welcome to our webinar today about menopause and how we can create a supportive culture in the workforce. I'm Sian Hughes, Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the SRA, and I'll be chairing the panel today. My first task is to pass on my apologies from Jane Malcolm, our Executive Director, who leads on EDI at the SRA. She's unwell this morning. She's very disappointed not to be joining us for this important discussion. But I'm delighted I have an opportunity to step in, and thank you all for joining us in what I think will be an important and insightful discussion. I'm really looking forward to hearing from our expert speakers. Joining us today will be, first of all, Nina Kuipers, who's founder of Black Women in Menopause, which is an organisation supporting women of colour experiencing the menopause. It's important that our conversation about these issues are inclusive, and that we'll start shortly with a presentation from Nina, who will talk us through these issues. We then have Tamsin McCarthy, Diversity and Inclusion Manager at DWF. Tamsin has been instrumental in her firm's workplace menopause network, which was awarded a Employee Network of the Year in 2022 by the ENEI, the Employers Network for Equality and Inclusion. We have Suzanne Caveney, who's Legal Director at Evershed Sutherland, who supports businesses in sensitively and effectively addressing menopause in the workplace. And finally, we'll be joined by Neha Lugg, who's a committee member of the Law Society's Women Solicitors Network, and she's also a senior legal trainer at Lewis Silkin. Neha has contributed to the Women and Qualities Commission call for evidence on menopause and the workplace, and frequently delivers training on diversity, equality and inclusion. So before we hand over to Nina to start with the presentation, I just wanted to say a few words, just to confirm that our own staff networks at the SRA have been really active in raising awareness about the menopause here at the SRA. And I'm sure many of my colleagues are on the call. I remember really clearly attending our first discussion about the menopause many years ago now at a meeting of our women's network. I learned a huge amount from listening to other women's experience, even though I'd been through the menopause myself. Since then, we've done a lot of work to bring all of our colleagues into the discussion and raise awareness in the workplace about the impact that menopause can have. For example, we have a buddy scheme for women in the workplace at the SRA. I know many law firms are doing some great work, and we'll be hearing about those examples and their work today. And I know that I'm looking forward to learning lots of new tips that we can bring to the SRA's workplace. And it's important that we all get this right within the legal sector. It has to be part of the wider debate about why there's such slow progress in the representation of women at senior levels in the profession. We know that women are joining the profession at about 3 times the rate of men, but there is still slow progress in senior levels. And research tells us also that 1 in 10 employed women have left their job during the menopause period. That's, of course, at a time when they may be in or just about to move into senior positions. And a Fawcett Society report looking at the financial profession has emphasised how important support is in helping people progress in their careers at this time in their lives. So that's why it's so important to break the stigma and the taboos associated with the menopause, and also to make sure that that conversation is inclusive. It's inclusive of women of colour and also trans and non-binary people who experience the menopause. So I would like to now hand over to Nina, who's going to talk us through the menopause with the perspective of women of colour. Nina, over to you.
Thank you for inviting me here to speak today. If I went back 30 years, I didn't think Black women in menopause would be a topic that I would be speaking about or even have a passion for, as I was actually more interested in the absence of Black people in competitive swimming which is a subject that I wrote my dissertation on. Upon reflection, the topics are very similar. When I use the term black, I'm using the term as identifying those who have African or Caribbean heritage or from any other black or Caribbean background. I'd like to ask you a question. Write down or mentally note, what do you see when looking at me? So what do you really see when looking at me? If you put woman, then let's be truthful. Was that really your answer? And this is one of the first issues. Why? If people are truthful, what they really see is a black woman. This is important, as when we then add another layer to these two words, such as menopause, which you can't see, and I say this because people do have implicit biases, and people who view others through different glasses. It's people's privileges encased with bias and prejudice that see a black woman. Why? Our feelings about gender and the stereotypes are something that have been developed historically throughout society. Accepted menopause norms are based on the experiences of predominantly white women. For marginalised populations or groups, there is an unequal distribution of power and wealth in the manosphere. The media sensationalise menopause and who it happens to. It fails to represent. Let's be frank, the menopause is not a rainbow. The media and beyond are causing menopause to be discriminative. The rain in which causes the rainbow is one colour. It is dominated by white women who are usually professional, often portrayed with grey hair, or it's a white celebrity with long hair, usually blonde. This can also be the case with many organisations, social media discussion groups, and support groups often upheld with patriarchal views. We need more stories and images to validate the variation of menopausal experiences. There are several organisations that are going out of their way to portray diverse images and experiences in menopause. It's growing, but it requires more than an image and storytelling to be diverse and inclusive. Content may not be relevant or actively alienating to someone who is Black, East or South Asian, LGBTQ+, neurodivergent, non-binary or trans. The impact is that you see and hear stories from people who look like you, gives you a feeling of connection and social support. Exposure through media representation can help counter stereotypes of marginalised groups. Whilst those listening may be thinking information on menopause generally is limited, yes, it is. A pattern does begin to emerge where the specific and nuanced experiences of Black women are limited in the conversation about menopause. Representation matters in every area, and if you are asking yourself why, it is the why that is important to explore, so people are able to have transparent discussions about why menopause representation matters. We need to break the current pattern on which and how the menopause is being represented in the workplace and beyond. How many high-profile Black women in menopause could you name internationally? And then narrow that down to the UK. The canvas is slowly having a splash of colour added to its palette, though mainly from the US. Celebrities such as Oprah Winfrey, again, recently has been talking about menopause, though she has been for 15 years. Or Michelle Obama, Erykah Badu, Viola Davis are just a few of the US celebrities. Yet, as mentioned, where are the UK Black celebrities? There are a few, but not enough are given the opportunity to paint their stories. Without a doubt, being able to listen to a story is powerful, especially when the one who is telling the story looks similar to you. You know that they have an understanding of your background and or struggles. Everyone should have an image and story of people who look like them so they can relate to. It gives support and validation. Exposure can assist in reducing stereotypes. Conversations of menopause in the UK have opened up and have had exponential growth in the last few years, notably due to what has become known as the Davina effect. However, we could be forgiven for thinking that menopause doesn't happen to Black women. The task forces and menopause education groups set up to address this discourse are not built on diverse and inclusive foundations for all. Is our biology considered? Often not. And if and when it is, our lived experiences, socioeconomic, dietary, cultural factors are often disregarded. We have to modify and adapt in order to fit in with a narrative that does not take into consideration our experiences. It affects people's confidence, not to mention the impact on their quality and quantity of life. And menopause makes people less likely to seek and attend their support groups in the workplace or even appointments. Ignoring cultural factors can lead to miscommunication, discomfort, and mistrust. I don't have all the answers. What I can do is speculate from my own lived experiences and reflect on the limited data out there and conclude from those people who I have spoken to and listened to. It's not about only walking in my shoes and tying the shoelaces. What if they don't have laces or have Velcro? On my menopause journey as a Black woman, it's also about being judged on the brand, the style, and colour. Just as each shoe type serves a different purpose, think how each menopause is different too. It's a complex and stressful interpersonal social environment that we may feel unfamiliar. If we do nothing, then our narratives will not be recorded and heard. It's important to remember that menopause intersects with everything else already present in a person's life. One of the most prominent areas of life where bias is played out is the workplace. For example, one of the strongest biases in the workplace is gender bias. The default for society, whether it be healthcare, equipment, legislation, is for white males. It is even more persuasive in the workplace environment. The workplace is armed against women in many ways. For example, their menopause, which as a woman's biology changes, she is deemed an inconvenience and/or a nuisance. It is this ignorance that drives people to not talk about it and possibly be ashamed. The number of reports are increasing about how the workplace is failing women and that these services have been created by men for women. Then being a black woman in the workplace has an extra dimension in which we need to untangle the misogyny and privilege. When you are part of the dominant group, in this case, white, it is people's whiteness and the privilege that affords them, that prevents them from actually realizing that race plays a massive part. As people would say the same of men, which is androcentric. Black women already face chronic stress as we navigate our professional lives within a race-conscious society. We are here today because it's deemed okay to speak about menopause. But if we add the word black woman in menopause, then eyes roll. What does this have to do with menopause? So when combining this with menopause, we add another layer of bias that spreads to and informs accessing appropriate menopause support or being taken seriously at work a concern. It is a complex balancing act to perform, whilst in a state of evolving identity and also confusion due to menopausal symptoms. There are other factors as well as the biological perspective. The assumption is we are all the same, just as people believe that menopause is the same for those who go through it. What can we do? 4 tips to build a bridge on which and what we can do to improve understanding of diverse backgrounds for menopausal experiences. Acknowledge, advocate, ask for those different groups that aren't included. Underrepresented are labelled often as hard to reach. Not so. People generally do not suffer in silence. But if they find it very difficult to reach help, then they are being let down. It's impossible to be knowledgeable about all cultures. People should be sensitive to the role that culture plays in their workplace without stereotyping employees. Then we've got represent, respect, reach, research. Who is sitting on the groups and making the decisions? Ignoring cultural taboo aspect of menopause assumes it is easy for different marginalised groups to speak up about their menopause. Material needs to feature people who look like them. It needs to be specifically tailored to them. And we've got collaborate, culture, authentically involve those and co-produce, learn about each other. The final one, help, harmonise, build and maintain trust, helps understand the similarities and differences among people in perceptions, attitudes, and expectations around menopause and beyond. Self-awareness, recognising that we all do have unconscious bias. How we think is affected by our own life experience, and sometimes this may not be right or reasonable. The starting point is to accept it exists. Take the time to learn about these communities, as this will help communication. Be respectful, be curious, ask questions in a sensitive, non-judgmental manner even. The arch encompasses all aspects regardless of race and ethnicity. It is vital that organisations are aware of the differences that affect a person's menopausal experience. Understanding these differences would offer a new perspective. It would also help encourage open conversations with other people. I, we, you, and they need to diverse menopause across the workplace and beyond, so that those in decision-making roles recognise, acknowledge, and champion wider inclusion. This is important in bringing parity to menopause for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina. That was a powerful reminder about how we need to make sure our conversations on these issues and our policies and our reactions are inclusive. I hope through the conversation that we'll have with our panel that we can highlight some of the factors that are specifically some of the tips that we can all take account of when developing our policies and our responses in the workplace that will be inclusive. So with that in mind, I thought the first question might be appropriate to think about the steps that everyone's doing to make sure that we are all involving people from different backgrounds in the work that we're doing on the menopause. So could you tell us about that in the context of the work that you're doing? Perhaps if we start with you, Suzanne.
Hi, yes, thank you, and good morning, everybody. So from an Evershed Sutherland perspective, we started many years ago looking at issues surrounding the menopause, and I think the biggest call out there is just the importance of education and training. So we have engaged with specialist partners who not only can educate women but also educate men and everyone right across the organisation about what the menopause is and the impact that it has on individuals going through it, but that really calls out that intersectionality piece that we've already talked about this morning. So it's recognising the fact that we can't look at menopause in a silo. It will affect every single individual in a different way, and that's been a key part of the education programmes that we've undertaken at Evershed Sutherland. We also have various internal networks for minority groups, so that's those from ethnic minorities and their allies, those with disabilities and their allies, those from an LGBTQ plus community and their allies. And menopause is also a key part of those agendas, so that there is a space where individuals can discuss and share experiences around the menopause, but with a particular focus on the issue as it affects them as a community. And I think that's an incredibly important part of that education piece.
Excellent. So education and keeping a safe space across all inclusive groups within the firm. That's some great tips there. Thank you. Hamzin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think from a DWF perspective, one of the things that I'm so passionate about, a little bit uncomfortable about in my introduction, actually, saying that I lead the group. I feel like the members very much lead the group. They are involved in everything. They've created that, they've led that, they've created that action plan, prioritising that action plan, and then the actions coming out of it, they're involved in all of those. So, for example, last year when we decided to formalise what we were doing in terms of a menopause policy, the members of the network, we had 10 volunteers that helped create that. They fed into that what should be included, what that should look like, help reviewing it. Similarly, we then thought about the user journeys, different intersectional identities, and engaged with our other diversity and inclusion networks. and to include those different journeys. So, for example, engage with our LGBT network to get their views and feedback on that policy. So that's always really important for us. We also look at sharing intersectional content across our hub. We have a centralised hub on our intranet with menopause content on, and that includes content on various different intersectional characteristics that we try to add to and evolve over time. And then recently we've done a campaign across our other diversity and inclusion networks to promote the work that we're doing around menopause, but also asking for that feedback, acknowledging, as Nina has been pointing out today, that experiences are different and that we want to hear from people and we want to understand what else we can be doing differently. So we have an open feedback channel that we ask people to provide their feedback on, to understand what else we can be doing to support people with different characteristics within our workforce. There's also a couple of other things that we do in terms of our communications. I think one of the things with menopause that's really important is to not make assumptions about who that might relate to, in terms of it might be somebody who has a different gender identity, it might be somebody that's younger than you would expect. So making sure that that information is shared with everybody. So we make sure we include that information on all staff bulletins. Also encouraging allies to build their understanding of menopause and how they can support colleagues in the workplace. And then we're also looking at menopause from a global perspective. Touching on some of the things that Nina mentioned today, definitely I recognise that previously my view might have been very much about the UK perspective, encouraging people to seek out support from the NHS and access HRT and things like that, and looking at those accepted pathways that we have in the UK. They may not be the right pathways for people globally. They may not be available to people globally. So trying to understand as a global organisation how we can talk about this topic, how we can support our global workforce as well.
Thanks, that's really interesting, and that's a perspective I think several of the panel members probably have had to deal with in terms of that global perspective, because things are very different across the world. Taboos are different, medical support's different, as you say, and that also echoed with me the user journeys. I think Nina, you were talking about the stories, making sure we had inclusive stories so we were reaching everybody within the workplace. That's really helpful. Thank you, Tamzin. Neha, did you have any? Would you like to share your experience?
Thanks, Sian, and good morning, everyone. So, yeah, absolutely echo a number of the sort of suggestions and initiatives that my panel members have shared today. So, at Lewis Silkin, we really have embedded menopause awareness and support as kind of a key aspect of our DE&I strategy. And I think it's really important to make sure that that sits firmly within that space. So to really include staff from all backgrounds, we regularly host sort of open discussions in that inclusion space, whether it's around disability, LGBTQ+. And so last year, particularly to tie in with World Menopause Day, we held a conversation with Speaker Caroline Note. So she's an MP and chair of the Women Select Committee. And this was very much intended to be an open, honest, quite a vulnerable conversation with shared stories and contributions, as well as that kind of discussion around where perhaps the government was heading versus where employers are heading. So we talked about menopausal symptoms, the potential impact at work, and the real importance of understanding that the experience can be different for those from different backgrounds. And I think that was a really important event really for us to break down some of those barriers, having those kind of vulnerable conversations that are not usually held in the workplace. And I think there were sort of two reasons why they were really well received across our firm. Firstly, it was around leadership support, that kind of tone from the top, and senior leaders really engaging in demonstrating that this discussion is important to them, and that creates that level of sort of psychological safety to help people feel empowered and supported to share their experience. And I think secondly, because it was hosted as like a hybrid event, it really provided the opportunity for all to attend. And actually, we know we're talking about allyship later, but especially for men, or perhaps who were supporting those experiencing the menopause, either personally or professionally. And I think hybrid can be a really effective way to bring allies into that conversation who perhaps might have felt a bit uncomfortable sort of, you know, being in that room for whatever reason. So I won't say too much about it now, because I know we talk about allyship later on, but just that at Lewis Silkin we're kind of working really hard to highlight that this needs to be an inclusive conversation, not just, you know, a woman's issue or a white woman's issue. We want to make sure that we're capturing the different backgrounds and the unique perspectives that play a role.
That's brilliant. So that's really good to have that overview. I think you've all given an indication of quite a lot of activities going on in your respective firms. I did want to come to that now in a little bit more detail, because we've been looking a little bit at some of how you've been inclusive, how you've had encouraged conversations, what your networks have been doing, and how your firms have generated that that interest and that those, you know, encourage those voices. So I wondered if we can come back to you all again. Just think maybe one or two key activities that have made a difference in your firms, the activities that the firms are leading to in an inclusive way to support people with going through the menopause. Suzanne, hello.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me okay? I dropped out there for a moment.
Apologies.
No,
sorry.
I thought.
Yes, I was just coming to you to ask a little bit about the activities that your firm has been leading. You've been really interesting to hear about the network activities. What are the key things that your firms has been doing to support women with the menopause?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is culture. If we don't have the right culture in which to foster these conversations, we're simply not going to make any progress. Excuse me. So that has to start from the top down. I know Neha mentioned giving that psychological safety to enable people to realise right across the organisation that it's not just you know, for the individual, it's for the entire organisation that why these things are important, and that has to start from the top. There has to be executive visibility, space to talk, and ensuring that every single group, not just the menopause group, but those other networks that I've mentioned, have those executive sponsors who really take the time and are visible in delivering the message that it's not just desirable to enable to bring everyone their whole selves to work, but it's absolutely a requirement. It's about psychological safety, psychological health, about well-being, and it takes time. We can't change that culture overnight, but we have worked incredibly hard to do that, and that has manifested itself in bi-monthly menopause support groups, a menopause policy. We've signed the menopause workplace pledge, but that is very visible. We've got the menopause workplace hub on our intranet, to the extent that that flashes up every time anybody logs in to their computer in the morning. These links are there, they can see it. It's not just for those individuals who are specifically looking for it, because if we hide these things away and there's lots of clicks we need to get through to get to that information, those that aren't interested simply won't look for it. They're not going to find it. So I've already mentioned, but I think it is key to mention again, the fact that we've partnered with a number of specialist organisations delivering those education sessions. And that's not just on the medical symptoms that are experienced by women undergoing the menopause, but really equipping managers and anyone who's a colleague actually to spot the signs that individuals might be struggling, to equip them with the skills that they need to have the necessary conversations so that individuals do feel safe in disclosing to managers and their colleagues that they might be having an issue, making sure that everyone is aware of areas that they can go to for support, and really cultivating that culture based on allyship and again, I know we're going to come on to that a little bit later, but specifically calling out that intersectionality piece that we've talked about so much this morning. I really can't overemphasize how important that is. So that's a key part of the training that everybody has access to, and everyone really is expected to take part in and understand.
That's really helpful. And you touched on you have a menopause policy. Are there any specific initiatives involved in that part of the policy, the policy that deals with the kind of support that people may need?
Yeah, absolutely. So policies are great. Employment lawyer, big fan of policies. But I think with issues like the menopause, my own view, others might disagree, is that policies will only take you so far. If we don't have that culture, if we don't have that training that sits around the policy, it's just words written on a piece of paper. I do think that policy is important. It sets out where individuals can go for that support. But the key thing with the policy for me is on launch, it's incredibly visible. It is combined with that necessary training so that we can really bring that written word to life. And make sure that it is embedded as part of that culture. Of course, everybody knows where to find it, but if we don't take those steps to really put the flesh on those bones, it's just going to get shoved in a drawer, quite frankly, and not go any further. So I think those activities in making sure it's visible are just as important as writing the policy itself.
That's a very fair point. So it's not so much what's in the policy, that's not the tricky bit. The tricky bit is making sure it's disseminated and that people within the workforce have the opportunity to get familiar with it and people are trained effectively on it. Exactly. Excellent. Tamsin, did you have anything to add? Sorry, Nay. Apologies. Did you have anything to add to that? Anything about the key point about content for the policy, or is it more important to get that bit right?
I would.
Neha, after you.
Thanks, Tamsin. I would absolutely echo everything that Suzanne has spoken about. That having a policy is almost not worth the paper it's written on if it's not lived and implemented. And I think that we're in this space in this world now where we're talking about women's health at work in a way that we've kind of never spoken about before, and historically we've not perhaps even needed to, right? And I think the working world, kind of regardless of sector, was largely created by men for men. And in the past, particularly when you look at that intersectionality piece, many women didn't perhaps work beyond marriage or work beyond having children. And really that's what that was my experience growing up. And I think we're now moving to this recognition that we need to open up these conversations at work, that the women's experience of the working world is not going to be the same as that for men. And we're really acknowledging how women's career journeys are kind of impacted because of health issues or life changes. And we're talking about things like endometriosis, pregnancy, baby loss, infertility, IVF, menopause at work in a way that we never have done before. So I think it's these open, honest conversations are just becoming so important. And to touch on sort of Suzanne's point around having a policy, yes, it is absolutely great to have a clear policy around support, perhaps signposting and linking out to those other policies, for example, like flexible working. But actually, it's really important to, I guess, to tie in with what Nina was saying, to really have leaders to acknowledge those differences, acknowledge the differences exist in the workplace, and be more supportive and be more inclusive. And like you say, Suzanne, line manager training is going to be such an important part of that. It's something that I support clients with in my role as a trainer, because line managers are often that first point of call. They're the first point of contact for those experiencing menopause, and we can't always assume that people know how to have those conversations, particularly if they've never had them before. And we're also in this kind of environment where there's perhaps an age demographic of about 50 years across from juniors right through to seniors. So we need to make sure that those current values around openness and honesty, and those conversations are kind of coming through. So yeah, absolutely, having a policy that provides clarity is great, but that open culture, you know, frequent those group discussions that we have at Lewis Shilker. We also have a book club, which I think is quite nice, that provides a sort of different focus, but brings in kind of ththose themes around menopause and intersectionality. But just making sure that there is an open space to build a culture is going to be really important. Sorry, Tamsin, fire away.
Oh, no, thank you. Just really to build on the piece around policy, and I think in terms of tips for people who are thinking about building a menopause policy or haven't got one and wondering what else they can do, I think it's really important to build on the resources you do have and making the most of those, particularly if you're just starting out. So, for example, in terms of workplace adjustments, and really thinking about that in the concept of personal needs. It's something that I'm very, very passionate about, because I think in the past it's been very much focused on, for example, physical disability and the aids that might be required in terms of that. I'm really passionate about and moving it to the concept of personal needs. Everybody has personal needs, whether that is picking the kids up from school, or whether that is managing your menopause symptoms, or whether that's a neurodiversity or whatever. And everybody has got personal needs, and we want to celebrate people as individuals. We want to ensure that they're able to thrive. So making sure that you have a workplace adjustments policy in place that enables people, gives people that toolkit of things that they might be able to use to help them achieve their best within the workplace, whether that be flexible working, whether that be access to a desk fan at work, or to make their environment more comfortable, whether that is working from home when necessary. I think it's really important that we think about that and we promote that regularly with everybody to make sure that they can share their needs and ask for support and ask for help when they need it. Also, the concept of inclusive considerations in everything that we do. Particularly throughout the employee life cycle and all of our other policies. So, for example, within the last year, DWF have done a lot of work to update our policies. So, for example, small tweaks in our dress code policy. We were sort of trying to update that. Very mindful of how that's changed over time with hybrid working and working from home, and making sure we're still smart on calls, and wanted to tweak that so it's professional, but also thinking, okay, well, how do we make sure that this is applicable to people with the menopause that might be fluctuating temperatures and how they manage that? So just being considerate of that. Also in terms of office design, something that we're working on frequently at the moment, again, as we move into that much more hybrid working being much more common, and thinking about how office design could be influenced by the needs of people that might be experiencing the menopause. What support can we provide to them? What facilities are needed? And thinking about those aspects as well.
I like that idea, not only being inclusive in terms of who these policies and approaches might apply to, but also bringing together our responses, linking policies together and making sure that they work for people. A broad workplace adjustments policy would cover lots of areas. We've talked a little bit, it's come up about, supporting managers through education and conversations, and I do want to come back to allies, but Nina, having kicked us off so effectively, I wondered if you wanted to come back in and comment if there are any particular highlights that you would like to draw to our attention in terms of content of policies or methodology for making sure people are aware of and contribute to a firm's approach, bearing in mind what you've told us at the beginning.
Thank you. I think it's difficult coming from a Black woman's perspective because of the lack of research in general, and there are numerous reasons and factors as to why menopause can be different. And I think often people throw people from marginalised groups into one mixing pot, which is one of the major issues in trying to integrate menopause in a diverse perspective. For example, research has shown that Black women enter menopause 8.5 months to 2 years earlier, though this study was conducted within the USA. So 2 years earlier than the national medium age. And so some people might be thinking, oh, that's great, getting menopause earlier is a good thing because they'll go through it faster. However, that's not necessarily true. It just means that we experience menopause for longer and that we will be longer in that particular factor. And it's also reported that Black women are more likely to report heavier menstrual bleeding, which may lead to things like hysterectomies, which can also trigger early menopause. So research issues matter, and this is integral to historical distrust in the medical profession. And then there's the added layers of not fully understanding other elements on top of that. For example, accessibility and affordability to things like HRT, and also the lack of research. So, for example, different skin types, and what I mean by that is the differences within the melanocytes, so why I am black, etc. Then we absorb transdermal therapy differently as well, which I think people seem to forget in terms of, well, what can make our menopause symptoms easier. It's also dietary aspects that can have a factor that can prevent menopause care. We're less likely to be referred. And I think when you think about all of these things, then we need to navigate carefully and acknowledge and try and build, as I said earlier, those bridges to ensure that people going through menopause in the workplace are being supported, but also have that empathy as well.
And I'm sure that's something that we can be built on when, with the kind of initiatives that we've heard from in the various firms today about how inclusive and how open the conversation needs to be, and how, of course, as women, we need to be allies to each other. But I wanted to touch base on allies. I suppose the bigger group of allies might be men in the workplace, and wondered what you all had to think about how important it is to bring men into this discussion, and whether you've got particular initiatives that have helped in relation to that. Suzanne, should we start with you again?
So to answer the question of how important do I think it is to bring men into the conversation, I think it's absolutely fundamental. In fact, I think it's one of the most important aspects. We've talked quite a bit this morning about the importance of shared experience and focus groups, and that's absolutely right. It's fantastic having those sorts of focus groups, but if they only consist of women, or even worse, only consist of women undergoing the menopause, whilst that's a fantastic and safe space to share experience, it's not going to shift culture. And the issue will still be hidden from the rest. We've also talked about the fact that we know at senior levels of firms still do tend to be dominated quite heavily by men. If those individuals are not part of the conversation, they're never going to drive culture. That policy that we've talked about will remain written but shoved in a drawer somewhere. So it's absolutely fundamental that we do engage in allyship programs. But having identified it as one of the most important aspects, I think it's also one of the most difficult aspects as well. I absolutely don't have the silver bullet here. I wish that I did. You can't force people to be an ally. But what you can do is make sure that you're working to try and create a culture where everyone can feel involved, as we've spoken about already a number of times. I do keep coming back to it, but I think it is a top tip in this space. Is I feel that having an executive or senior sponsor of these issues is absolutely key. Some might say that it's worth thinking about having that sponsor being a man. Others might say, actually, we'd prefer it to be a woman who's actually lived through this so that she knows what's going on. But I think at least having visible senior male individuals talking about this stuff and impressing the importance of it and making sure that other men can see that how important it is a great start. But also menopause affects everyone. It affects men as well as it affects women, not biologically, but certainly in the case of, they will have wives, they will have mothers, they will have friends, they will have colleagues going through that. So it's about helping those individuals to understand and see that this is an issue that affects their life as well. Is a great start to try and getting them engaged and involved. As I said, I don't have all the answers. I wish that I did. I'm sure others on the panel might have more.
On that note, I'm not expecting you to give us all the answers, Neha, but I wondered if you could touch on, I heard you told us earlier about your training role. Could you tell us a little bit? Do you have struggles getting men in the room for your training? And also, could you talk to us? I know that you on the network support the Law Society's Women's Solicitors Network, and I know for sure there are great resources for law firms on the website, the Law Society website, which we can provide some links to. But bearing in mind your experience at your firm in terms of training and involving men in that, and also are there any top tips there on the website for us?
Oh, thanks, Jane. So yeah, absolutely. Wish kind of had a silver bullet there, but I think in terms of that educational piece, as part of my role with Lewis Silkin as a trainer, we go out and speak to clients about issues that impact kind of workforce well-being, productivity, all of those kind of aspects. And I would say that across all of the clients that we support, including in the legal profession, this is a really big issue for them. And so many organisations across different industries struggle with women in senior roles. We don't have the representation that we have at the junior level. And you mentioned in the legal profession, we have by quite a significant mile, women entering the profession but not being progressed, supported and retained at those top levels. So we need to know that this is not an issue that just affects the legal sector. It affects all the clients that we seem to work with. It's not just an issue for the legal sector. But just to touch on the impact of the legal sector, and kind of before sort of starting on that menopause at work journey and understanding why it's such an important issue at work, I think just to touch on the importance of the issue for the legal profession, and especially the future of the legal profession. So we know that women make up a significant and increasing part of the legal profession in England and Wales, and the recent Law Society stats did show that those holding practicing certificates, that women continue to grow at 3 times the rate faster than men. So we've got a significant future workforce issue that we need to be dealing with. And also representation of Black, Asian, minority, ethnic background also continued to grow across the legal profession, which is great. And that was reaching 18% where ethnicity is known. So this is all great, but we need to make sure we're retaining, promoting and progressing that talent. And it's also a key issue for in-house legal teams. Again, Law Society data showing that in-house environments, those holding practicing certificates and in-house environments grew by 44% in the last decade. So this is, again, a huge area, particularly as that's an area that seems to be dominated or sort of attracting more women, with approximately more than half again of those holding practicing certificates working in-house being women. So in terms of bringing men into this conversation, recognising that our profession, the legal profession, there is a significant demographic that is women, and we need to make sure that we're continuing to retain that talent at the top level. So absolutely, yeah, we at the Women's Solicitors Network at the Law Society really work to progress a more inclusive profession. And we do that by kind of amplifying the voices of women, highlighting the challenges and inequities that exist. So in 2020, the Law Society published guidance, and we drew on support from an organisation offering specialist workplace menopause support, as sort of Suzanne mentioned. And it's not particularly lengthy, so if you haven't had a chance to look at it, it's definitely worth the read. it kind of sets out how menopausal symptoms can impact day to day at work, and how to sort of offer that support and adjustments that we talked about earlier. And, you know, one size won't fit all. There'll be different adjustments required based on backgrounds, different roles, all of those kind of things. But from the data that we have at the Law Society, we can see that our menopause pages, the guidance that we have around menopause, you know, very reassuringly for our conversation today, was one of the most frequently visited Women's Solicitors Network resources. So I think that's absolutely great. And it just shows the importance of the issue. You know, the menopause demographic in work is the fastest growing demographic in work at the moment. So we need to be looking at how that impacts not only the world of work, but the legal profession specifically, and the future of the legal profession, whether that be in private practice or in-house. And I think that's, again, how we bring men into this conversation, that this is going to be an important issue for, you know, long-term productivity across the business.
That's great. Tamsin, if I could bring you in on a slightly different angle, have you got any tips for men who are managers? Let's look at it from both sides. Men who are managers who want to be better at managing their teams and being responsive to these kinds of issues, and also tips maybe for women who have male managers, and about how they it might be kind of, how can they ways to raise the issues that they have. We're running quite close to time, so if you could keep your answer fairly brief, but both from both aspects, bringing in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Allyship is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. When you think about the fact that it is people that you're interacting on a day-to-day basis that have the most influential impact on your working experience, it just shows how important it is for us all to be allies of one another. I think that for me, it's about accessing the resources that already exist. So go out there and educate yourself. So whether that is seeing what's available within your organisation. So, for example, at DWF, when we launched our menopause policy, it was accompanied by a line manager and colleague guidance, so that everybody could understand how they can get involved and support people that are experiencing menopause within the workplace. But also there's fantastic resources out there, and so much free, wonderful content to help you understand these issues, help you understand what you can be doing differently to be more inclusive and supportive of colleagues that are experiencing the menopause. It is scary. I think all sorts of allyship, it's always scary. You're always thinking, is it my place? I don't know anything. I don't want to get it wrong, so I'll just not get involved. But what's really important to know is that the silence is the worst thing you can do. So maybe you will make a mistake, maybe you won't fully understand it, but as an ally, you're not expected to fully understand it. What's expected of you is to be brave, to go and do some research, to listen, to learn, and to build on your understanding so that you can support other people in the workplace. In terms of male allies, I'm a huge advocate of this, and I think it's really, really important to give another angle on the menopause topic. We did a webinar at the back end of last year, which was around sharing different menopause experiences. We had a male ally that shared his experience of a time that he went through where people that were reporting to him, his PA and his wife, were all going through the menopause at the same time. So he learned a lot. He had to learn a lot very quickly, and became a big ally, big advocate of learning and normalizing a conversation around menopause. And that conversation really inspired a lot of people to step forward and be brave and be an ally of menopause in the workplace. In terms of advice for people in having those conversations with a line manager, whether that be male or female, I think for me, again, it's about being brave, but also very much about the planning. I think in terms of don't spring that on somebody, give them an opportunity to learn and educate themselves, but also give yourself enough time to be able to approach it. It's a very sensitive, very personal topic, so make sure you're planning that out, thinking about what you want to say, thinking about the support that you think you might need and the help that you're looking for, but making sure that you're setting time aside for that in a private area, making sure that your line manager is aware of the topic that you want to talk talk about in advance. And if you can help them by sharing maybe the policy or resources that they might find useful as well, helping them along that journey is also really a really great step that you can take as well.
Fantastic. I think that brings us almost to a conclusion. I just wanted to thank, huge thanks to all of our panel members, Nina, Suzanne, Tamsin, fantastic. This, I think, itself will be a great resource for people. So really appreciate the powerful reminder, Nina, at the beginning of this session about how important it is to be inclusive. You spoke specifically about women of colour, people of colour, but of course that goes across all of everybody's experience. It's very, very individual experience, and we mustn't make any assumptions. I got that very strongly from everybody. Education, absolutely. Everyone, I think, touched on how important that is, and making sure that is includes everybody and is inclusive. Policies, yes, you could get a policy, you need a policy, but the most important thing is how you bring that to life across the board. Culture, make it all part. I heard a lot of issues around how to make this part of your informal learning, how to build your culture about having open conversations, how important that was. And I think using the resources, we're all, I suppose, fortunate at this point where it has been the past few years where these conversations have been had in the workplace. Now, I didn't speak to my mother about her experiences. It was more taboo in those days, but I think there's a lot of conversations that could be had now. There's a huge amount of resources. Please do visit the Law Society's website for lots of resources and plenty of others available too, which we'll be able to post. So to conclude, thanks once again to everybody for your insightful thoughts and very helpful tips on having a workplace which properly deals with the menopause. Many thanks.